fight was over. Dr. Grant, Ellie, Tim, and Lex stand in complete shock as the terrifying T-Rex walks out of the visitor center. Carcasses of 3 velociraptors lay waste on the floor, their bodies twisted and disformed and nearly unrecognizable. It was for the good, though. If it wasn't for the T-Rex to come in and handle the raptors, then it would be human remains inside that visitor center instead of deadly carnivores. Dr. Grant gathered his thoughts for a second and allowed the T-Rex to get a little further out of range before he decided to collect everyone and make the scary walk out of the visitor center. Before the group could make it to the doorway, the sound of a Jeep in the distance roared towards where the group was located. As it got closer and closer, it became clear that it was John Hammond and Ian Malcolm. Ian, with his still injured leg from the previous encounter with the ferocious Tyrannosaur, was still able to walk, but not fast. Dr. Grant and the group rushed towards the Jeep. John Hammond noticed all the cuts and bruises scattered all over the bodies of his terrified grandchildren. John asked, "Dr. Grant, what the hell happened to them?" Grant, with a confused look on his face, screamed, "John, you need to ask yourself that question. What kind of park is this? This isn't a tourist attraction. This is a death trap. I tried to keep them as safe as possible, but clearly you are the one to put them in danger." John said, "Dr. Grant, you're right. I should have had more security. I should have built walls instead of fences." Dr. Grant cuts him off and says, No, you don't get it, do you? You are so focused on the idea of doing something that nobody has ever done. Do you understand the carnage that just unfolded? People out here died tonight, and that blood is on your hands. You are so focused on thinking that it could be done, but you should have asked yourself if it should be done. Dr. Grant bulks up and gets right in John's face and says, "You need to stop pretending to be God." John saddened and with the look of defeat began to cry. "Dr. Grant, this is not what I intended. This science and technology was going to be the stepping stool for future projects. Unfortunately, dinosaurs were the first thing that we could try to resurrect. We knew if we could bring back 200 million-year-old beasts that used to walk this earth, anything would be possible. We were going to go in the direction of manipulating diseases like cancer to stop the spread. We were going to try to clone cells to regrow body parts for people who needed hearts and livers and appendages. We also thought that a tourist attraction with this magnitude would result in greater funds to make these future life-saving projects happen." Dr. Grant gave John a shallow, saddening look. The look seemed to resemble a man who didn't want to agree with him, but Dr. Grant knew he was right. A raspy radio voice came over a walkie-talkie that John had on his side. It said, "John, the chopper will be inbound in 10 minutes. John let the group know that he called for an evac right before he and Ian rushed to the visitor center. "We need to get going," John implied. "The evac area is about a mile away from here, and once that helicopter lands, it won't be there for long." Everyone crammed into the small Jurassic Park Jeep. John, being the driver, proceeded to crank it up, but the Jeep wouldn't start. John tried multiple times over and over, but the Jeep was completely out of gas. Lex shouted, "Dr. Grant, what do we do?" The group, frightened that they might not make the evac spot, desperately looked at Dr. Grant for answers. Dr. Grant said, "We only have one option. We're just going to have to walk there." The group proceeded to charge towards the path that led to the evac area. The daytime sun casting over the Isla Nublar Island began to fall behind the dense forest surrounding both sides of the path. Each member, huddled closely to each other, proceeded cautiously. Ellie and Dr. Grant had Ian's arms draped over the back of their necks so that Ian would be able to walk a little easier and would be able to keep up with the group. Step by step, they got closer to the evac spot. Distant howls of compies and groans of bronchiosauruses lit up the sunset sky. Lex let out a whisper, "Are those meat eaters?" Dr. Grant replied, "I don't know." Tim, still hobbled by getting electrocuted off the paddock, asked, "How far do we have left, Grandpa?" John asked, "We're almost there, Timmy." By each passing second of traveling down the deep, dark path, it seemed that getting attacked by another raptor, or even a Dilophosaurus, would be inevitable. At least one thing was known. The Tyrannosaurus went the other direction, so thankfully he wouldn't be a problem. "What's that noise?" Ellie gasped. "Everybody stay calm, and everybody don't move," Dr. Grant whispered. Loud stomps continued out in the thick forest. Trees began to sway back and forth from something large and gigantic within them. The trees looked like they were going through hurricane-force winds, the way that they were being thrown around like blades of grass. Dr. Grant, thinking to himself, thought, "That's impossible. The T-Rex went the other direction. There's no way that's a T-Rex." Seconds later, out stepped a T-Rex, but it was not the same T-Rex the group had been dealing with before. This T-Rex was deep green in color, a little smaller than the other T-Rex, but just as ferocious, and this Rex was a male, and being a male means more aggressive. The T-Rex stepped completely out of the forest to the middle of the dark trail. Knowing that this isn't the same T-Rex, Dr. Grant gave John a deceitful look and silently but angrily said, "You didn't tell me you had another T-Rex." John, scared out of his mind, looked back at Dr. Grant and told him they had to make two just in case one of them died so they would have another option. But he stressed that T-Rex was locked up behind concrete walls in the depths of the island. Dr. Grant sighed out of anger, but proceeded to tell the group to move off the path before the Rex could notice them. They cautiously moved to the left side of the path when suddenly Timmy tripped over his feet and fell to the road with a loud thud. The Rex instantly turned his head and made eye contact with the group. Dr. Grant again whispered, "Don't move a muscle." The T-Rex, curious, began to move towards the group. As the Rex got closer, his eyes focused on every object one by one. Dr. Grant, Ellie, Timmy, and Lex were all covered in mud to protect their scent. Ian, still wounded and bloodied, and John, with his complete white-colored outfit that shined in the night sky, stood out the most. The Rex sniffed Grant, then Ellie, then Timmy, then Lex. Ian was positioned perfectly behind Dr. Grant and didn't get noticed. The Rex turned his head sideways and made direct eye contact with John, and John made direct eye contact back. John, not being able to control himself, let out a large cry, and the Rex chopped his jaws around John's torso. John screamed for help as the Rex raised him in the air and started violently shaking his head back and forth. Help me! The group for a second stood in shock but knew there was nothing they could do. Lex and Timmy cried intensely as they sat there and watched their grandfather be devoured. Dr. Grant screamed for everyone to run into the forest so they could avoid being chased by the Rex. The Rex wasn't worried about the group. He had already had his meal. From the skies above, they heard the sound of a helicopter. They rushed to where the helicopter was landing, waving their arms back and forth, directing for them not to leave. Finally, reaching the helicopter, the pilot asked, "Where's Hammond?" Dr. Grant, with a shocked look on his face, said, "He didn't make it." A T-Rex roar takes place, and the pilot jumps in the driver's seat and the group flies into the night sky. Hammond, once a man with a scientific advancement with resurrecting the extinct, met his demise with that same exact creation. The status of Jurassic Park will forever be unknown, as the beasts continue to roam the Isla Nublar wasteland. We will forever be horrified by the events from Jurassic Park.